You're standing in a gas station bathroom at $0, 22 years old, running the tap over your hands longer than necessary because the mirror in front of you is the only quiet 5 minutes you're going to get all day, and you're studying your own face like it belongs to someone you're trying to identify in a lineup. You look tired in a way that has nothing to do with sleep. Your eyes have the specific flatness of someone doing math constantly, in the background, underneath every other thought: rent due in 6 days, $41 in checking, a paycheck that clears Friday if the shift schedule doesn't change again. You're not sad exactly. You're braced. Every muscle in your face has learned to hold a position, the way a hand learns to hold a cup that might be too hot, ready to let go the second it has to. 31 years later, you're standing in a different bathroom, in a house that isn't a metaphor for anything, just a house, and you catch your own reflection while brushing your teeth, and for a half second you don't recognize the calm on your own face. Not happiness exactly. Something quieter than that. The specific stillness of a person who has stopped bracing for anything, because there's nothing left that can knock the ground out from under him. Net worth, $103 million, give or take what the markets did that week, though you'd have to check to know the exact number, and you genuinely don't remember the last time you checked. The money didn't change your face. The absence of bracing did. And it turns out those two things only look the same from a distance. This is the part almost nobody tells you honestly, because almost nobody's lived through all of it long enough to see the whole shape. Your personality doesn't change once, at the moment you get rich. It changes 6 or 7 times, in stages, each one so specific you could set your watch by it, and each version of you would barely recognize the one that came before. At 0, or close enough to it that it doesn't matter, the checking account that dips into single digits before payday, the credit card you carry specifically for emergencies and have used 4 times this year on things that weren't emergencies, just close enough, your personality organizes itself entirely around threat detection. You become fluent in a kind of math nobody teaches in school, the exact number of days a gallon of milk stretches if you're careful with it, the exact hour a gas station drops its prices before a holiday, which grocery store marks down bread on which specific evening. You develop a defensive sense of humor. Somebody asks what you're doing this weekend and you make a joke about living large. And the joke does 2 jobs at once. It deflects the real answer, and it lets you laugh at the situation before anyone else gets the chance to. You learn to read a room in seconds because you've had to. A friend picking an expensive restaurant means you're either going to embarrass yourself ordering the cheapest thing on the menu or spend money you can't spare pretending you belong there. You get very good at figuring out which one costs less socially, before the waiter even arrives. Your friend Miguel, from those years, still tells a story about the 2 of you splitting a single appetizer at a birthday dinner because that's what the math allowed, and you both laughed about it that night like it was nothing, and only one of you was actually doing the math in real time. At 0, your personality is a security system. Every social interaction gets scanned for cost before it gets felt for meaning. The first real cushion changes something specific and small, but it changes it completely. For the first time, a flat tire is an inconvenience instead of an emergency. And that one shift, inconvenience instead of emergency, does more to your personality than almost anything that comes after it. You start allowing yourself tiny indulgences, and you notice, almost with surprise, that you feel guilty about them anyway, out of habit, the guilt outliving the actual scarcity that created it. You buy coffee out instead of making it at home and something in you flinches slightly, a phantom limb of poverty, still aching even though the leg's not gone anymore. Miguel calls you one Saturday to invite you to a weekend trip, 3 friends splitting a cabin, and for the first time in years you say yes without doing the math out loud first. You still do the math. You just do it silently now, in your head, instead of announcing it as a joke before anyone can ask. At $10,000, you're not free of the fear. You're just starting to notice it's a habit, and not a fact. You are, at this stage, still fundamentally the same person from the gas station bathroom. Just one who started to suspect, quietly, that the bracing might someday be allowed to stop. Something shifts hard here, and it's not the number itself, it's what the number does to your instincts around other people. This is the stage where you learn, for the first time, to hide. Not out of shame. Out of self-preservation. You notice, almost immediately, that telling people the actual figure changes how they treat the rest of the conversation. A coworker who used to talk to you about anything starts subtly angling every conversation toward investment tips. A cousin you haven't heard from in 2 years reaches out just to catch up. And it takes exactly one phone call for you to understand what catching up actually means. You develop a specific talent at this stage, the art of the deflection that doesn't sound like deflection. Someone asks how you're doing financially, and you say, getting by. Which is technically not a lie, since getting by describes almost everyone's relationship to money at any number, if you define it broadly enough. You get comfortable letting people underestimate you, and you notice, with something between relief and unease, that you kind of like it. Miguel, at this stage, still thinks you're doing fine, not amazing, because that's the version of the truth you've handed him, and you watch him relax around you in a way he wouldn't if he knew the real number, and some part of you understands, right then, that you've just made a permanent trade, honesty for ease, and you'll be making some version of that same trade for the rest of your life. This is the stage where your personality splits, quietly, into a public self and a private one. Almost nobody notices the moment it happens. You barely noticed it yourself. You expect, at some point around here, to feel like a millionaire, whatever that means, whatever image you built of it back at the gas station bathroom, some vision involving ease and certainty and a face that doesn't brace for anything. It doesn't arrive. That's the whole personality shift at this stage, the specific, disorienting gap between the number and the feeling. You check your accounts sometimes just to confirm the figure is real, the way you touch a bruise to check it still hurts, because some part of your nervous system, built at zero, refuses to fully believe the number without regular proof. You become, for a stretch of years, quietly obsessed with not acting like a millionaire, whatever your imagined version of that behavior looks like, flashy, careless, deserving of resentment, and this overcorrection becomes its own kind of personality trait. You underspend relative to what would actually make sense for your life, not out of discipline anymore, but out of a fear of becoming a person you've already decided you don't want to be, based on people you've barely actually met. Miguel, around this time, goes through a rough patch, a layoff, 6 anxious months, and calls you, and you help him quietly, structuring it as a loan he barely has to think about repaying, and you notice something new in yourself in that moment, the specific pleasure of being useful without being seen as useful, of fixing something without collecting credit for fixing it. At $1 million, you're rich by any honest measure, and you don't feel it yet, because feeling rich was never actually about the number. It was about a permission you haven't given yourself. Somewhere in this range, your personality hardens in a way you don't fully notice until you look back at it later. You get better, much better, at reading motives, sometimes too good, catching manipulation in places it doesn't actually exist, because you've been burned enough times by places it did. You start testing people, quietly, without telling them you're doing it. You watch how someone reacts to a modest version of you, the same civic, the same restaurant choices as always, before you ever let them see anything more. You've become, without planning to, an amateur behavioral scientist, running experiments on your own friendships to see which ones would survive contact with a real number. This is also the stage where you get quieter in rooms, not from insecurity but from a kind of calculated economy. You've learned that every opinion you offer in a group gets weighted differently once people suspect what you're worth, so you start offering fewer of them, unprompted, and letting people ask if they actually want to know. Miguel notices this one, actually, the change in how much you talk at dinners, and he asks you about it once, half joking, whether you've gotten boring in your old age. You laugh it off. You don't tell him that the shrinking isn't boredom. It's armor, built one guarded sentence at a time. At $10 million, your personality trades warmth for precision. You become excellent at protecting yourself and slightly worse, for a while, at being fully known. And then, somewhere past a certain point that nobody can name exactly because it's different for everyone, something loosens again, and the strangest part is that it loosens back toward the person you were before any of this started, not the vigilant kid from the gas station bathroom, but the version of him underneath the vigilance, the one who existed before scarcity taught him to brace. The money, at this stage, stops functioning as a number that requires management, and starts functioning more like weather, present, occasionally inconvenient, never something you spend real energy worrying about. You stop testing people the way you did at 10 million, not because you've lowered your guard carelessly, but because you've finally metabolized the actual lesson those tests were teaching you, Most people are either the villain your guardedness expected nor the saint your hope wanted. They're just people, doing their own math, same as you always were. You call Miguel one evening, decades after the appetizer split at that birthday dinner, and you finally tell him the real number, not because anything forces your hand, but because you're tired, in a good way, of the version of the friendship that required managing what he knew. He's quiet for a long moment on the phone. Then he laughs, the Real laugh, the one from before either of you had any money at all, and says, "You still owe me for that appetizer, you know." And you laugh too, and something that's been held tight in your chest for 30 years finally, quietly, lets go. At the far end of it, your personality doesn't become someone new. It becomes someone old again, the person you were before you learned you had to brace for anything, minus the fear that made the bracing necessary in the first place. You're back in a bathroom, brushing your teeth, decades past the gas station one, and your face in the mirror isn't handsome or transformed or particularly different in any way a stranger could point to. It's just calm. Genuinely, uncomplicatedly calm, the specific calm of a nervous system that finally believed the math and stopped double-checking it. You think about that kid in the gas station bathroom sometimes, running the tap longer than necessary, studying his own bracing face like a stranger's. You tell him, if you could, that the money isn't really the story. The story is that his face is going to relax eventually, stage by stage, argument by argument, guarded year by guarded year, until one day he looks in a mirror and doesn't recognize the calm looking back, and that calm, not the number that bought it, is the actual finish line he's been running toward his whole life without knowing it. You rinse your toothbrush. You turn off the light. Somewhere in a drawer is a card with a number on it that would have meant everything to the person you used to be, and means, to the person you are now, almost nothing at all, just weather, just math, just the long, quiet proof that the bracing was always the thing you were actually trying to spend your way out of, dollar by dollar, stage by stage, your entire life.